Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Our last conversation of the year, which feels almost unbelievable, actually. And very good to have this space and to see so many of you back again. I'm going to hand over to Tom because this is a entirely unstructured, evolving conversation. So, Tom, there you go. And you can do the notes in the chat. I'll do notes in the chat.
Okay. Well, hi, everybody. Thanks for checking back in with us and picking up on the series of great conversations we've had. And if you haven't participated in the ones prior to this, that's quite okay, because I think most of us will find some themes that resonate that we can build on. So kind of being an open mic into the conversation that we have had now, I would ask everybody, let's use the chat box and use that as a way of participating. And also feel free to speak up at any time, because we don't have any scheduled speakers, but we will build on some of the scheduled speakers that we've had before. Having said that, please, everybody in the chat box, put your name and tell us what drew you to this conversation today. In the chat box, put your name and what drew you to this conversation today. Why did you show up? Everybody has a lot of things to do and lots going on. Well, I see everybody isn't pressing send at the same time. Your name and what drew you to this conversation. So that's great. I see it starting to come in. So let's start. Marcello, you were one of the first to put up. So briefly introduce yourself and then tell us why you came in. Feel free to read what you put in the chat box, and we'll go down.
Yeah, so you made us say this in person, so thank you. I saw Indra's name and I thought I would like to see her again after many years. And Jerry Salol as well. I know him for some years ago. I was intrigued by the group and the title, and I thought it was very pertinent at the end of the year to have this conversation. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Carolina.
That's what happens, right? Yeah. So I'm Carolina Iva. I'm a facilitator with Climate Kick, with the Systems Innovation Learning Partnership. And in our work and in my work of trying to mainstream the systemic approach while trying to reinvent the systemic approach, coming together with communities of fellow practitioners is just like the core of our work. And Tams and the conversations we have had always have been very insightful. And I'm just really appreciating our budding friendship. I'm going to call it like that. So I'm very grateful to be here. Thank you.
Tom, you're on mute, sorry.
Joffrey.
You're calling on me?
Yeah, there you are.
Oh, well, it's wonderful to have an opportunity to connect with people on such a global basis. I mean, isn't it amazing that we live in a time when we can communicate like this in real time with so many people? It seems to me like that's the route to solving so many of the problems that are driven by the politics of the age. And we've just seen it in our own country with an election where billionaires were able to get their man of choice, and now they're filling up his cabinet, and nobody knows how that's going to shape up. So anyway, wonderful to be here.
Okay, thank you. And Joe, you've been on with us for the last 2 or 3, right? So what drew you to these?
I don't remember what originally drew me here. LinkedIn, maybe seeing a post somewhere on there. But yeah, I remember it's one of the few spaces that I've been involved with this year where the word metacrisis occasionally gets mentioned, and the room doesn't immediately all just kind of turn around and go, "Huh? What's that?" So that's kind of interesting for me.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Joe. And Tam Lundy.
Hi, everyone. This is just my second time with this group, and but I'm really happy to be here. I wrote in the chat that what drew me was what seems to me to be a combination of not just wisdom, but also people who are actively engaged in the world. And I think this is what we need more of. We need lots of great philosophy, and we need lots of great engagement. And my work is working with educators who are preparing young people, children and youth, for that role that they're going to play. And I think the word metacrisis is really important here, because this really is a time where, people often say it's a time between worlds, where the world that we have been familiar with is not going to be the world that our kids are living in. We don't know what's coming next. And so my work is to help them to develop some of the social and emotional skills that are going to be absolutely necessary for them to be engaged citizens and to be more than just self-authoring, but actually to play an active role in the kind of change that's going to be needed.
Okay, thanks. And for those of you who just linked in with us right now, we're putting our name and what drew us to this conversation today in the chat box, okay? So Sarah and then Oren, and then we'll get kind of started.
So hi, this is my first time here. I've not been in one of your meetings before. I think what enticed me in is that I find myself in the position of I've become very engaged in what's going on in the world. I've used the word metacrisis and polycrisis in a lot of things. I went back to university and did a master's in sustainable development, and struggle to find people who I can really connect with on these topics. So essentially, trying to, expand on sources of positivity, sources of intergenerational knowledge, sources of social activity, and trying to find a network that I can be a part of who will share also the negativity and the positivity, because there is both light and dark in this journey.
Good points. Thanks, Sarah. Oren?
Yes, good morning. I'm here because Commonweal has a deep commitment to resilience, and part of that resilience is the internal resilience that's necessary to deal with these kind of existential challenges. So when the introduction to this was about goodness, was about how do we find our own source that we can deal with these existential challenges and not burn out and fall into despair.
Okay, thanks for that. I think we have some shared feelings across some of our participants. Anyone else who wants to, Joan, we didn't get you yet. Did you want to keep quiet or you want to speak up?
You're on mute, Joan.
And you're on mute. You're on mute, Joan.
What a verb to use, get you. Maybe it's consistent with the title of the session, but I mean, obviously here for the community and the thoughtfulness and the different perspectives. But in terms of this particular topic, when and I'm sorry to bring this down to this level, but when my grandchildren, who are 7 and 5, asked me what to do after Trump won the election, and that's a whole different story, the only answer I had was one of being kind and being generous, that he wasn't a nice man, but something they could do, was to be, it made us more responsible for being kind and generous and thinking of other people. And do I believe that? I don't know, but what do you say to little kids at such a dark time? I mean, I think I believe it, but we don't have to go there.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I'm actually seeing less kindness and generosity around me, and with people who I would expect kindness and generosity from. And maybe I'll just put a comma, period, semicolon there. So how do we bring the two together to find the spaces, understand this lack of generosity of spirit just on the streets and interactions with people? I know. And so it's, so yes, that's one reason I'm here.
Okay. I noticed Mesa came in and joined us. Mesa, we're just saying why we showed up here. You're welcome to unmute and tell us why you were drawn to the conversation today.
Okay, sure. Yeah, thank you guys for having me. I've been on a couple of these, and every time I just want to come back. So it's a short answer, but I guess I graduated a couple years ago from my master's in conflict and global development. And so, I started doing the career thing of what conflict am I going to go into? And when I started reading about the meta crisis, the poly crisis, I realized they're all connected. And so I got involved in democracy and community building work here in the States after returning from school. And so, yeah, I've just been becoming more involved with people who are thinking on this more holistic level as I've gone. And I very much relate and resonate to what Oren said about needing to develop the inner resilience and the inner resources to take on this work and not burn out. So anytime I see something about goodness and your meetings are always so constructive, I can't resist. So thanks.
Okay. Thanks for that. So let's kind of start to jump into it. Jerry, you had kind of a similar comment, but you're welcome to share what drew you today. Okay. He said he liked our company, so I think everybody should know that. So so let's do one more exercise before we move further, and that is that you've all been in kind of virtual meetings and webinars and all that, and let's think about what are some norms and good practices in good webinars and good conversations that you've been a part of. So, and this is an idea of setting the standard for ourselves today. What is it about good webinars and good conversations that make them so? And so we can kind of get some norms for our process, and then we'll jump into it, okay? So tell us about some good experience you've had or good experiences, and what was it about them? Thank you, Tamsin. What creates a good space for goodness? Yes. And we've all been part of processes that work and don't work or better than others, but what are some of the qualities and characteristics?
I just want to say that I think there's an art to the process of listening. And I think particularly in the age that we live in now, when we do so much communicating remotely, listening is a skill that serves one very well over the long term, because other ideas generally enrich where you already are, and so you being open to the new ideas is a very important part of the process.
Okay, good. Anyone else? Jerry put in when people are polite but honest and barriers come down. Please put in the chat any other kind of good qualities. So we can.
Well, I learned a lot from Joan. I mean, she's been an inspiration for me, and through my work with her, I've had the opportunity to connect with a lot of distinguished people whose voices I think are very important to share in this process. I mean, and I want to mention that I'm just in the process of reading a book by Steven Pinker. It's called Enlightenment Now. I don't know if anybody's heard of it, and I'm not quite finished with it yet. But what's wonderful about it is it's an antidote to the pessimism that sort of overrides everything else. He makes the case that we've never in human history had it better than we have now, and there's a lot of people who seem to want to go back 100 years, and I love his take on these things, and he backs it up with a lot of documentation showing that there's never been a better time for education, healthcare, and childcare, and it's a good time to grow up. But for us, it's also a time of reckoning, because we have a politics that's so corrosive, at least in the United States, and it seems like other countries are in kind of the same place, is polarization that we have to get past, and that's a big part of correcting the course for humanity.
Okay, thank you, Jeffrey. And Mesa.
Yeah, I think for me, an important first step is some level of relationship building or trust building even, and that can just be checking in like we just did, or sharing good news, or stating why we're there. But if people don't have some reminder that we're humans and not just pixels, I feel like it's hard to really want to engage.
Mm-hmm. Sarah, you had a good point there.
Yeah, I think it goes in alongside with what's already been said in terms of manners and politeness, allowing people the space to speak and not interrupting them. So raising hands, and I think also like I just engaged with Messa as she was speaking, liking something, thumbs up. I think again that also lets people know that they are being listened to, that somebody is actively participating in the conversation, without butting in and interrupting their flow. And reminds people that everybody else is human, right? That we have feelings about what's being said.
Mm-hmm. Carolina.
So I find that knowing like what is it that brings us here today in this moment helps for each of us to manage our energy and also how we show up together, and then be fast or be slow or be loud or be quiet or be tender or be fierce.
Okay, thanks for that. So I'm going to do a really quick synopsis of the conversation last time. And there's a lot of things to build on, and we can build from there or go a separate way. But Ela started off in the nurturing spaces for social change. Mental health is being seen as an individual that was sick and needed fixing. And the change happened when we stopped seeing ourselves as individual beings who needed fixing. We need to learn how to fit in uncomfortably. And she called for the education for the end of the world as we know it. We need to learn to be gentle, real, truthful, honest, but the desire to be good and feel good should not overshadow pain. Joe Eldon talked about, he did a survey about what keeps people up at night, young people. And it was climate and mental and physical health, which is a Western rich country, secular, individualistic problem. Community bonds against harms are fraying. It's loose bonds which makes people vulnerable. And he goes on to saying that tight bonds of community insulate people against harm. Indra talked to us about, before COVID, the entire public space was defined by certain values, power structures, single gender. 30 years ago, the digital space gave power access to a much more and new kinds of intimacy. Young women, for example. Indra talked about soft power as a psychosocial therapist and as a Buddhist. Adults cannot support the children who have woken. We need a deeper sanity. We have been accepting and tolerating the threat of nuclear war, dairy and meat industries, and hierarchies. We cannot talk of mental health problems without the social health conditions for the problems to arise. People are growing up in a dysfunctional, breaking down world. It's not the end of the world, it's the end of modernity. Modernity, which has been based on growth economy, patriarchy, colonialism, and extraction. And then she talks about the 9 themes: security, attention, autonomy, intimacy, feeling part of a community, privacy, status, competence, meaning, and purpose. And advertising has been selling us products and possessions that we believe will give us status and belonging. Sean talked about what is most important for us is to see the systems we're embedded in. There's a mismatch between the systems we are in and the systems we need for our own development and thriving. When youth that he worked with were asked, what is it that you need from this experience to be seen, honored, and accepted? He came up with the systems change through togetherness practice in service of a different world. And we need to allow ourselves to find value in our own gifts, to be best versions of ourselves for the world. We need not a deficit-based approach, but a positive asset approach. We must discern the conditions of systems that are at play and create spaces to see the whole in the systems to align self, organization, and systems. His key was psychological safety and belonging. The ability to slow down, to listen, to notice, and become increasingly aware of ourselves and others, and have empathy and conscious empathy and compassion as a core value and skill set. So without going too much further, I did want to remind us of what we covered last time and help us, those who weren't there, to have a starting movie. And the big thing about intergenerational connections and inviting people to what we are seeing. Where does our imagination take us to? And Indra talked about a 3-part process of what is, what if, with radical re-imaging, because imagination is what built and created what we have. And actually that was Hila, wasn't it? Okay. So anyway, and Halima spoke up and said the societal tendency of defining success and system outline roadmap to the very success leaves young people with so much pressure. So we'll kind of leave it at that. Jerry said we need a escape as part of our toolkit. We need to understand better how we can trigger escapism because I think we need that sometimes. Graham talked about all crises come down to relationships between humans and nature. Martin Buber relationship is everything, sharing and caring, the I thou. And again, talked about the education push and the Buddhism pull and the and the primacy of relationships and the need to have dialogue. And I think this was, several of you said this, public-private related to people who are not like us. So rather than going through everything we went through, but I tried to put in a nutshell what we covered last time. So starting with that, let's think about why we came here. And is there anything there that resonated that you'd like to pick up on, take us further? Yeah, Sarah, thank you.
So the thing that stood out to me most was this idea of imagining and imagining the future, imagining our situation. And I very much recall this exercise that I did in one of the modules that I was doing for my master's, where our tutor put us through this process of imagining the future. What is the world that we wish to see in 20 years' time? Imagine that wherever you are, every government on the planet has made what you would consider the right decision. And what does the world now look like? What does the world now smell like? Who's there? What is it that you see, touch, feel, taste? And I think this was really important in because a lot of people are angry and they want to fight and they want to make change, but they don't necessarily know what they're fighting towards. They're just angry. So, you know, the world isn't right, but they don't know what right is. And I think it's really important that we practice this art of imagining, of actually defining what it is we are specifically aiming to achieve with what we do, because that gives you choices in how you can achieve that. That defines what behaviors you take, how you engage with the world. Otherwise, you just don't know what you're doing. You're just like annoyed in every direction. So this act of imagining the ideal world, or our individual ideal worlds, on how to then address our problems.
Okay, great. Yeah, the role of imagination and reimagination. Inder, you talked about the internet has melded the private and the public, and also some of the themes that Sarah was talking about, you threw upon. You want to take us further?
Yeah, I mean, just to pick up from Sarah, because I feel that there's quite a lot of imagination practice beginning to be used in different places and at different in different contexts. But I also feel how important it is. I think what Messer brought in just now is the idea that we're not trying to imagine or agree what that future should look like, or that it would, in a sense, become perfect. So the actual action of bringing in what's technically the dreaming brain is partly because we're always yearning for something different. It's also partly because our imaginations have been so captured by something else, right? So to create space for imagination for me, the most important thing is, can you release your imagination into something new that is possible? And you probably won't get it straight away for yourself. You know, I know in the imagination practices that I've done that I can't help but imagine something better than what exists. You know, so I'm still reacting to the old system to create the better than. But it takes quite a lot of practice, and preferably with people who are doing the practice together, to actually get to something genuinely different that maybe you never thought of before. You know, and just to come back to the way you started this, Tom, when you asked the question, what the people shown up for, you know, for me, to find places like this where you can just give your attention for long enough, you know, to be in the company of people who are yearning for something else, and to use your imagination in that space. The giving of attention to something can actually bring something into being. You know, so yeah, thanks for that focus down there, Sarah.
Yeah, and we can inspire each other. You know, the inspire comes from the Greek word to breathe life into, right? So we can co-inspire together. We can breathe life into. Tell us a little bit more then too about the creating spaces and for imagination, and what do those look like and feel like and taste like to use? Yeah. So another thing I was going to say, and please, keep the timing. But I was going to say the miracle of a space like this is that it's the epitome, if you like, of this term that I use a lot, and I call cosmolocalism. So here we are. It is a global gathering. You know, people are coming from all over the world. However, our emotions are very personal to us. They're our own emotions. You know, we're not now moving into the space of global emotions. You know, suddenly that should be something different from what we feel, because in reality, our feet are on the ground. So even as we're in this virtual space at a global level, our feet and our bodies are still on the ground where we live. So when this is over, I will have learned something from a global space, but I've still got to make it work where I live. So that
to me becomes the other space that is so important. So I've been a great fan of the Zoom room, since I first came across it, because I think it is extraordinary that we can meet this way. However, there's a lack of that on the ground in the community that I live. Where's the equivalent of my Zoom room, in my neighborhood? There isn't an equivalent of that. And that's the thing I feel when we're talking about new sorts of spaces, to nurture new spaces. For me, one of the key things would be to be able to nurture a space in which people come together to give each other space to reimagine the future. And that's what we call community agency networks. But again, this is not the same as a people's assembly, where you all come to agree something.
Yeah.
This is much more like a church, if you like, where you might hear music and give space, to allow everybody to reclaim their imagination on their own terms where they live.
Beautiful. Thank you. Well, we will come back to you, Indra, but Jerry and then Marcello.
I wanted to thank you for that, Indra, although I wanted to contest the fact that there aren't spaces like this. I'm currently the chair of something called the European Cultural Foundation, which a long time ago helped the EU with the Erasmus program, which has taken off. And we've been looking for what's the next Erasmus for about 5 or 6 years now. And about a year ago, our chief executive at the foundation said he thought he'd come back with an answer. And he has basically persuaded the board that our next big bet is going to be libraries. Libraries are paid for by the state. They exist in every community. They're exceptionally important parts of the infrastructure. And frankly, we're trying to make sure that libraries are connected to each other. But I think there is also physical space where people feel safe, they get warmth, they meet friends, they play games, they read books. There is an incredibly important role for infrastructure in communities that I would like us all to think about, because we need to grow this community enormously. It's not enough that 12 or 18 or 24 people can talk. We need to find ways in which we reach out to a larger audience. And so I'm basically urging us all to think about how do we bring more people in to conversations like this. The mental health, the other thing, another foundation I work with is the Evans Foundation, and they've committed themselves to mental health of young people because they think the mental health predicament in Europe, at least, is extremely difficult. So I'm just thinking there must be things we can actually support in the infrastructure that's out there that we will miss if it disappears.
Okay, thanks, Jerry. And Marcello will come to you, but I just want to thank Michael and Stanley, who have also been posting. We'll come around to you. But Marcello.
Yeah, so I wanted to share something. So 10 years ago, I co-founded the movement of B Corps in Europe. B stands for benefit. We have about 10,000 B Corps around the world, Patagonia, Triodos Bank, and so forth. And 2 years ago, we created a cooperative called the For Good Leaders Cooperative in the Netherlands. So it's based in the Netherlands, it's global. We have about 10,000 invited leaders. And what we are doing now, and that really what I'm saying is also what Jerry was saying about reaching a bigger audience. We are launching a planetary stewardship pledge together with the university in Barcelona called ESADE, because we did some we dug up some numbers, and there are 300 million graduates of economics, business, and law in the world, and 255 million students every year join as students. So the Planetary Stewardship Pledge is a sort of Hippocratic oath for professionals who are working in the economy, because the economy is one of the big problems we have. How do we turn an economy? Well, how do we make it more regenerative, etc.
Mhm.
So we are testing it out with ESADE is a well-known University of Law and Economics in Barcelona. They happen to be a Jesuit school, and they like the idea. So what I wanted to share with you is if anyone has any questions or criticisms, I like to hear. But we are trying to reach a bigger audience, and we think that the young professionals in the economy, in law, in accounting, and so forth can change, need to change, and this might be a way to help them to change. Thank you.
That's inspiring, and we need inspiration. It's good to see different things that are going on in different parts of the world, different themes and common values. Joan, can we come to you and tell me if it's too early? But I know, Joan, you facilitated the last session, and I don't want to leave you out of this because I know you have a lot of impressions and things. And you're on mute.
I actually have nothing to add to this, but I'm absorbing both the expansion of past conversations as well as sort of peeling away some of the layers of the ideas. I mean, some of these ideas are, warrant a conversation in and of themselves. I mean, the whole libraries, and we can all go, probably most of us can go back to a time where libraries were the central place in communities, and there were opportunities for interaction among people as well as the reading that took place there. For those of us who are attached to our phones, I remember being at dinner parties 50 years ago, and there would be a debate about some fact. And we would call the public library at 10 o'clock at night, and someone would go look it up. I mean, there are pieces of community and coming together in our history that we have forgotten and that we haven't sort of passed on as possibilities. So the future thinking that ties to the past but isn't locked in the past and requests a new definition but has seeds there might be one thing that's important to think about as we envision the future, is not to forget the seeds from the past. So,
And what were the sacred spaces or spaces where we would come together before and have stopped doing? And what are the new spaces that we can create? So
right.
there is this nourishment and dialogue
Right.
that creates new meaning, right? So, and I don't want to call on people and put people on the spot, but I know that both Michael and Stan, have opinions on these. So without putting you on the spot, just wave and say no. But Michael, can we hear from you, or you want to wave off? Feel free.
Sure, Tom. Well, first of all, I'm drawn to this because I think Tamsin and you, Tom, and Jerry and Joan have created such an extraordinary community here. And I'm just so honored and grateful that Oren and I are able to support it. I really find this just to be such a precious space. My sort of contrary nature, I guess I will say, I'm reluctant to speak the truth, but I will. One is that I have a very deep conviction that in order to deal with the polycrisis, in addition to looking for hope, very much looking for hope, in the service of looking for hope, we have to look in a very clear-eyed way at what is actually happening in the world. And so I won't carry on about that, but the fact that governments of Germany and France have fallen in the same month that Syria has collapsed. And in other words, the geopolitics of the situation, which so powerfully affect our ability to mobilize resources for benevolent purposes, I just have a great personal need to look at that clearly, precisely in order to find realistic ways forward that meet our aspirations. So that's my first point. My second point is equally sort of off the mark at a certain level. But I have, some of you, Tamsin certainly knows this, a very deep interest in consciousness research. And specifically, the question of whether consciousness is just a random epiphenomenon that emerged from the evolution of the human brain, or whether, as the panpsychic theories, meta theories suggest, consciousness is a ubiquitous feature of the universe, and perhaps even the primary feature. And if that is true, and the anthropic principle, which is that the universe appears perfectly designed to support life, suggests that consciousness is universal, then what are the implications of returning from a single century of materialist science to the default view that has existed from animism to Neoplatonic thought and up through the 19th century? People believed that it was the default theory that consciousness was primary or at least ubiquitous. And that suggests a deep moral structure to the universe in which I find great hope, precisely because whether we succeed in this experiment on this planet, which we dearly hope we will, I believe that this impulse toward advanced planetary civilizations is probably universal. So there's this combination for me of this profound realism on the one hand, and using realism as a ground for exploring what we can truly work for, and anchoring myself in a sense of universal consciousness and benevolence. So I know that's pretty weird for our conversation, but hey, you get to do weird things when you're 81 years old.
Thank you. Thanks for that, Michael. Yeah, and we, as Indra and others said, we really need to think outside of the system of which we're a part of, and which constricts our own imagination or reimagination. And Stan, feel free to wave me off if you want to pass, but you put a couple of things in there I thought were interesting in the chat. And then Oren will come to you because I really want to pick up on some of your ideas there about regenerative communities.
An impossible thread to pick up, so I might actually lay a parallel track here.
Okay, good.
But I think I've lived a good portion of my life in community, a good portion of my life off the grid in the mountains. And I've lived a good portion of my life without electricity, sometimes without running water, where with the community they live in, we eat dinner by candlelight, and where people work together in the fields and we grow food, where our work leads directly to our nourishment and our sustenance. And it's challenging to convey the feelings that come from being in such a deep, authentic relationship with other people, the conversations, the space, the feeling of connection. And I feel like this conversation very much is about that. How do we reconnect with each other? And I offer that story in a way because those feelings and that connection did not come through the median of Zoom. It did not come over a highly advanced technological system. It didn't come over really actually calendaring and scheduling and really strategizing how we may most effectively bond and share time together, but happened a little bit more circuitously, less linearly. And there was a deep, deep beauty in that. And so the second reason why I tell that story is because in these conversations that you and Jerry and Tamsin have put together, there is a really strong thread from polycrisis and resilience thinking to practice. There is a strong analysis that as the polycrisis advances, global supply chains will become more challenging. The movement of supplies and goods, the debt overhang that we know many countries have may kick in, making things more expensive. There is a sense of modernity that is sunsetting. And oftentimes there is a lot of fear, and there's a lot of concern, and there's a lot of that scarcity, that different ways of our relationships with material goods are going to arise. And how we navigate and live, I think, terrifies, quite frankly, a lot of people. But there's another side of that where I want to say authentic human connections doesn't necessarily happen over those material, Western, linear kind of strategies, and that there is actually something beautiful, there's something good, and there are ways for us to feel more connected with ourselves and with each other if we are able to step outside of that system at times. And so I offer that as maybe not balm, but is something that is also possible in this time of immense change. And I'll just leave it there, but I very much enjoy this conversation. Thank you, Tom.
Oh, thanks, Dan. That was that kind of inspiring too. I think we're again co-inspiring each other on this, and it's. Can we go over to Oren? You had some really good points there about regenerative communities and islands of resilience. Can you build on that for us, please?
I found myself on a cruise ship going across the Atlantic 3 weeks ago that had 400 people on it. Were mostly a combination of wealth holders and people that are doing regenerative work all over the world. Most of them in their 30s and 40s. And they were very much aware of the polycrisis. That was a phrase that was shared, polycrisis or metacrisis. And at the same time, there was this sense of joy and belief that there was hope for these young people who are going to grow up in 30, 40 years and face the consequences of the realities of the polycrisis. And it made me wonder kind of at the challenges of how do we approach this, because we can approach this at a global and national level, which is a challenge because it's hard to create transformation in the United States right now at that level, but creating kind of an archipelago of islands, of regenerative communities starts to plant the seeds and hopefully ripple out in the way that well, I'm not sure monasteries in medieval Europe are the best example, but the idea is that there are points throughout communities that holds wisdom, that holds knowledge, that hold change, and that those can ripple out within those communities. And that is a way for younger people, for local communities to make that kind of change that then inspires the kind of joy and hope in order to move ahead. And that can ripple out. So kind of after this journey, it made me start thinking a little bit, both about how important to work at the national level, at the level that many of us have been working at, but also thinking about how do you plant these seeds until you create the critical mass that is needed, not to mention that these islands will also be islands of resilience as the challenges come down. And the question is, how do we keep those movement happening at both levels, in kind of within the local communities as well as at a national and global level?
Thanks. And I think kind of directly relevant to this thread, Nonhala, would you mind commenting on your point about in South Africa and African indigenous knowledge systems? And come off mute and help build on this. Thank you.
Hi, Tom. Thank you. It's great to be here. Yeah, so I've been sort of working just as a personal thing, as a personal venture, sort of learning the science around the polycrisis and what's going on around the world. And then looking here in South Africa and seeing in townships, rural areas, people don't really see it, don't understand it. So also as a personal thing or journey to try and simplify it for me so that it can be easy to create conversations and spaces for conversations around these topics. And I found that an easier route to get into it is understanding African indigenous knowledge systems. And also African spirituality, because it feels as though the more research I go into it, Africans were living a regenerative sort of they were a regenerative society.
Mhm.
So it's really a way to say, how do we go back into the future, in a sense, by taking back what is ours as we move into the future in a regenerative way, that our ancestors were used to live. So this is just a venture that I've taken up to try and bring in, even when you think about business and business training, how do you make it regenerative using African indigenous knowledge systems and spirituality? And I think it is interesting for me to see that at least I'm sort of in the right path just based on the conversation. So that's the comment, yeah.
Let's build a little bit more on what you've just shared with us. That was inspiring. So tell us a little bit more about what keeps you going. What is it that gives you hope? And
Sure.
what is it? Yeah.
Oof. Um, I think a better South Africa, a better Africa is the thing. Um, I see the potential that the country has. I see the potential in the people, but I also see the sort of hopelessness that exists.
Mhm.
And generally, it's because people see what's in front of their physical eyes, and they make decisions, and they have emotions based on just that, and they don't go beyond that, and they don't imagine a world better than what they're living in now. And I think for me, seeing Africans, sort of live in their potential is the thing that keeps me going. And I'm in the space that I'm in because of that. I'm in training, by the way. So that's what keeps me going. But also, more than that, I want to create a future where my kids can thrive in. So that's, yeah. I hope that answers you.
Okay, Carolina, can we switch to you? You just put a comment in there. We might want to build on that.
I just got this book from a friend who's with the Hellinger Institute, and they just had a trip as a whole institute to South Africa. And this is the book that she brought with her. So this is my Christmas gift from her to me. So I'm just deeply moved by this. And as I was listening to you, Hennis, I was listening also. Sorry, I'm new to almost all of you, so I'm trying to find people. There you are, to Oren. I thought of this, of the importance of, like, of play together, of dancing together,
Yes.
of connecting art, of doing things that fill us with awe and beauty. And right, so like this, Sarah, was it you who has been speaking about like the power of our imagination? And we're like in Climate Kick, we're talking about like the crisis of the collective imagination, right? Like, and like I'm a big believer in the solar punk movement, but even there, right? Like the ideas, the visions, the scenarios of the future that we have, they're kind of, like green roofs and maybe like aqueducts next to a road. So it's a little bit limited. And so, like last week we had a deep dive on like shifting the power together. So like how do we decolonize the systemic practice? And what we did is we invited a dancer to be with us. And what happens when you invite artists as a facilitator is artists don't stick to a script, right? So what was supposed to be a 5-minute intro through the body became a 25-minute of a 2-hour call, like everything went out of the window. And in the call, I realized I believe in words so strongly that I don't even know it, that for me, the healing and the shifts are coming through us being in conversation together, right? And what happens when somebody just goes through the body and you realize, damn, people are not going to be able to go into breakouts and have conversations. And then you let that in, right? So like I managed to let it in and I realized, we're not so old as humanity, right? And like in not so long ago, we used to heal and come together through body, through community, through movement. So I'm just also longing to those spaces where we dig our hands into the ground and, like do work together, do celebration together, do ritual together, and allow for the future to come through us in that way, even if we don't have words for that yet.
That's very powerful. The power of art, dance, music, getting out of the cerebral mode and the full dimension of what it means to be human and humans together. I think that's very powerful. I want to just highlight Sarah, I think, and Tamsin. I think you both know you're from South Africa. I don't know if you know that or not, but there was something that was it Sarah? Did you want to speak up on that? You did make a comment and you've been very expressive, so.
Oh, I think particularly, I heard that I wasn't the only South African on the call. But with regards to what Carolina has just said, when I was doing the concept of community and healing in community, when I was doing my master's, I did one of my assignments on the use of psychedelics, and that's not the point that I want to speak about, but when I came across the peyote cactus and Native Americans using peyote cactus, and obviously, as obviously a white person, we tend to view this as a hedonistic practice, using drugs in any way, and it's generally like as a personal experience, as a way of having fun. It's not a collective thing. But what I learned during this essay was that Native Americans, when they quite often would use peyote cactus in community as a method of healing. So like, you're a foreigner, you're not allowed into this tent, but somebody will come to them and be like, I'm depressed, I'm an alcoholic, there's an issue with me, and they view it as a community illness. They don't view it as an individual, there's a problem with you, go off and go get your help. It's like, we need to heal this in community. They bring people in community and they will engage in a ritual, in a practice in community, and do the integration in community. And I think, certainly I feel like that's something that's missing. I think that's something that we can certainly engage in better. And I'm not saying that everybody should go and do psychedelics or anything like that, but I think there should be space for discussion, integration, openness, crying, joy, like to feel emotions, because we're not supposed to feel, right? We're just supposed to be head down and be productive.
Right. And these are all kind of things as any of you design your next workshop or encounter or meeting, think about some of these things, how you can infuse this. Indra, this really builds on themes that you talked about last time and today as well. And you did have your hand up a couple of minutes ago. You want to can you continue the thread for us?
Yeah, I mean, I feel as if I wanted to go. I'm still holding, really, Michael, what you were talking about, and about the need to be able to see clear-headedly about the dark that is approaching, as much as we are focusing on the light that is possible. And I was trying to remember whose quote this is, and also to tie that into your consciousness question. I'm sure somebody will tell me what the quote is, who quoted this, but it was something like, humans made this polycrisis through the power of their thinking, and they can unmake it and remake it through the power of their thinking. So there's that quote that sits here in this room, and then there's the other quote that we'll all be familiar with, which is, we can no more think of the end of the world than we can think of the end of capitalism. So the question is, what is the power of our thinking and the power of our minds? And I think the conversation that has come up since you put that on you put that in front of us. I hope that what I think happened was that a lot of responses to the question came up, and one of them, coming from you, I'm really sorry, I don't know how to say your name, Lanla from South Africa. What I felt at that moment was this sense of the things we're looking for, the things we're yearning for, that might be the solutions to our problems, are already there. They're already there in our world, present, maybe have been there all along. But what is important now for us is to shift our gaze to those things, to shift our attention to the things that we've always been excluding from our idea of what the polycrisis is. So, I'm Indonesian myself, and I recently have made it a practice to hear more on social media from Indonesians, especially young Indonesians, who happen to have the biggest democracy in the world, and also one of the most high-function democracies in the world, with a regular turnout at their elections, which is the biggest one, of about 60 to 70% of people. So there's something going on in a different part of the world that looks at this polycrisis in a very different way. As they may be doing in South Africa, they're looking at it as something that's ascendant, something that has now beginning to play its role in the global power structure, something that people have been waiting for a long time. But it does require us in the Northern Hemispheres to drop our idea, not only of what the solutions might be, but what the crisis actually is. The very first time I met a young Black girl in a drama group I was in, we were trying to talk about the climate crisis, and she turned on me and said, this is not my crisis. Was a shock to my system. I had to understand what she meant by that, but I did eventually understand that her crisis was something quite different. And she didn't feel responsible for this crisis. So there's a lot more that is, I think there's a system dying for sure. There's an old system dying, but I also think there's a new system coming into vision. And that we, from a consciousness point of view, we can, and again, this is whether you think you're of the consciousness, or are you generating the consciousness? I mean, there's a lot of different ways to talk about consciousness, but for me, I'm thinking that I'm taking part in the universal consciousness. And if I shift my gaze, then the gaze is shifting. That's the way I experience it, because I'm now seeing things I never saw before. And I'm hearing from people I never heard of before. So I can't help but be a little bit optimistic. And I mean optimistic, I don't mean hopeful. So optimistic meaning I see the evidence. I see the evidence of new things coming through that I hadn't seen before. And I then try to give more and more attention to that to feel more hopeful.
Yeah, I think I want to build on that part. There's the darkness around us and it's emerging, and the light within us and among us. I think, how do we maintain this optimism or hopefulness as we go forward in encroaching darkness? So I like the way that you say, let's shift our attention, our eyes toward what is kind of more hopeful. And the micro movements. Carolina, you want to, maybe, I think you're picking up on something there. How do we get through this? Huh?
I'm trying to go because I need to go. It's evening in Berlin, but it's very difficult. We've been working for the last year with 8 experiments across the globe, and trying to understand how can we learn about how systems shift, and how can we learn to understand where to apply our action. And I'm just going to try to be brief here. One of the things that we have learned from our cohort is that, the changes, the transformation, they're not going to be visible within a year. They might not even be visible within our lifetime. But there are these micro movements, and it is our work to make the invisible parts of the transformation of the larger paradigms that are happening right now, to learn how to consider that as data, how to give it respect, how to pay attention to it, how to support it, how to be with.
Yeah, excellent points.
And I'm going to say bye. Thank you so much.
No, thank you. Excellent. And how we make the invisible visible, respect, support, ally, be a part of, and support. So, Jerry, we'll turn to you. And I saw another hand go up and it went down again. But Jerry, we'll go to you.
Okay, I don't know how much time we have. I wanted to tell you a story. I think I'll pass, but what I was going
Go
to,
for it. Go for it.
oh
We're
no, I
20
think
minutes. Yeah.
I mean,
Love your stories.
it's about relevance. This is a true story. The man who supervised my PhD was a guy called David Turton. He'd done field work in an area in southern Ethiopia called Morsi. And the people in Morsi really are in some of the most remote people on the planet. And maybe 20 years ago, 30 years ago, they were doing a disappearing world film of the Morsi. Many of you may have seen it. And in order to do that, they decided they would take a Morsi speaker in case there were things that David couldn't translate for the film crew that was editing it in Addis Ababa. They decided to take a person from Morsi to Addis Ababa. This person had never worn clothes of any shape or form. He'd never seen a two-story building. He'd never been in an airplane. He'd never been in a hotel. He didn't know how to eat with a fork and knife. He didn't speak any other language other than Morsi. And he was taken in the space of a couple of hours from Morsi land by helicopter to a place called Arba Minch, where he then got on a plane and was then taken to the Gion Hotel in Addis Ababa, which is a five-star hotel. In the meantime, they bought him clothes, and everybody in the film crew, everybody in this trip was waiting for the reaction. They wanted to see fear, excitement at being in an airplane, in a helicopter, wearing clothes, eating Western food, and nothing perturbed this man. Nothing moved him at all in any shape or form. He showed no shock, no surprise, no interest, really. I mean, he was interested, but he wasn't particularly excited. He got to the capital. He stayed there for about a month while he was helping them with the film, and he did not show anything, any reaction at any point. He was very nice to all the people who worked in the hotel. They thought he was a Sudanese diplomat. And it was only 3 days before they had to send him back to Morsi, that somebody had this crazy idea to take him to a dairy farm.
Oh,
And he saw a cow that could produce 18 liters of milk in a day. The closest you can get to 1 liter in Morsi is in the rainy season. So the idea of a cow that could produce 18 liters of milk blew his mind. He wanted that cow. And he didn't want the cow because he wanted to own it. He wanted to show people back in Morsi that such a thing could possibly exist. It was the only thing that moved him. And I have often been afraid that I'm like this man, that I only see what's relevant to me. Right? That if it's not relevant, I don't see it. And it's one of the things that I use now to say to people, be cautious. There may be things you're not seeing because they just do not compute in your brain. So I just thought I'd share that with you because actually some of the things you're saying are really powerful, but we need to find people who come in from left field and who see different things than we do. I'll stop there.
Yeah, in fact, some of our answers might be within those who disagree most with us, right? I think there's a certain humility that we need about, and this came up last time, we need to learn how to talk with each other and talk with people who we don't normally talk with, and with humility and deep listening. And as we go forward, I want to make sure that if Tam or Joe, Jan, Mesa, any of you who haven't spoken up yet do have time to do so. So Tam, we'll switch to you. Thank you.
I'd like to link what Michael was saying with Jerry's story, which that's a wonderful story, and I think you should tell it often. But what Michael raised was the question of consciousness and whether consciousness is an epiphenomenon of the brain, which of course has been the standard materialist perspective for quite a long time now. And whether consciousness is something that's much more primary in the universe, and perhaps it isn't just something that we experience, but something that goes beyond us in ways that we connect. And so, one of the things that I've worked with for many years now, and I know this isn't going to be unfamiliar to any of you, but it's the notion that consciousness isn't just, but consciousness evolves. And as consciousness evolves, we can see more, we can take more into account, and we can act on it. So when we're working with kids, we say this in a really simple way: what I can see, I can act on, and what I can act on, I can change. But in order to see it, it has to be in my awareness. So what we're actually working to grow is our capacity for awareness.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it relates to the story because we all, we're not just seeing through our own experiences in the world, but we're seeing through our mind. And our mind is evolving. And so, how do we keep holding that in a way that supports each of us to, with all of our mental capacities, to be able to see more so that we can act differently? And so the evolution of consciousness, I think, is also a way of making sense of different perspectives in the world, why people see things so differently. And, when I can see how someone is making sense of something, I have so much more compassion. I have so much more empathy. And I also know that there's another way of seeing, and that, just because this person is seeing things in a certain way doesn't mean it's the whole picture. So how do we start expanding what we consider to be the whole picture?
Yeah. And putting that whole picture together with others.
Yes.
Which kind of gets into also the issue of intergenerationality, among other things. And Indra, you did have your hands up a while ago, and you also have made some interesting comments about listening to younger people. So how do we expand this awareness and consciousness that goes beyond, as Jerry was talking about, our own particular vision and reality of the world?
I mean, this also picks up another piece, another thread that somebody began. My question around the foregrounding of libraries. So I think libraries for sure are going to be very, very important. However, I think that we should watch or ask ourselves, what are young people doing with their time that they choose to do without being told? And I would say there's a greater emphasis, more than ever now, on music and movement and dance and so on. And so my political inquiry, if you like, and why I use the word political is because I'm looking for where is this new awareness arising actually, and where can that generate agency? Rather than trying to correct things all the time. Maybe there's another awareness, consciousness. There's many different, and I appreciate the relationship between awareness and consciousness, but maybe there's another sensibility, let's put it that way, arising that is coming through music and through festivals and through a new ontology, rather than the one that we convinced ourselves of a century ago, that somehow the only way to move forward is to be part of a machine that is generating a growth economy and giving us material benefits. It seems almost as if there's a really great alternative to that. And some will say, oh, that happened in the 60s. And it did, but it's got a very new context now because we're living in the age of the internet, and our emotions and feelings and spirit count, in our idea what is agency, in a way that maybe in the 60s it was more of a rebellion against something. So now, so yes, please to the libraries, but equally yes, please to the festivals. And even the festivals need to evolve now into something more intimate, where space for hearing is offer as well as moving. So I'm, I can't help but be excited for my own next generation, that there's at least the permission to go ahead like this. Whereas I don't think I had that permission. I went, I had to get straight on the ladder, right? And by the way, I failed to get on the ladder, so I'm a failure.
Yeah. But I appreciate this openness, the awareness, consciousness, and sensibility that you talked about, and then how we find people and be with them where they are and where they want to be, and how those, like the festivals, yeah. So I won't even try to paraphrase that. That was beautiful. And Mesa, let's turn to you. I know you're going to build on that for us.
Yeah, I mean, that's a perfect transition into my question, which is about how do we, sort of raise awareness of these topics of the polycrisis in a way that meets people where they're at. I think the depth of understanding and processing that the circle has done around these topics it's really mind-blowing and beautiful, and it's also incredibly rare. I think ordinary people, especially my age, they if approached with this sort of topic, it would be overwhelming to them. So I'm wondering what sort of on-ramps we have to extend that permission that you talked about, Indra, to an invitation that doesn't just immediately, lead to burnout or to absolute denial.
Yeah, in a way that's inviting, welcoming,
right,
and not manipulative or transactional too, right? I think it's a genuine openness to listening and being with others. As we turn the corner, we've got about 10, 12 minutes left. I know, Joffrey, you put a couple things in the chat there, and anyone else, please raise your hand or tell me, because
I just want to mention the importance of stories. I mean, I learned this from Jane Goodall. She said, if you want to get to the heart, the way to do it is with stories. And I'd like to see a lot more stories emerge in the media that fictionalize where the future is going, to provide a vision for what it looks like. If you can show people what the future looks like, then you've got a better chance of bringing people together behind that positive inspiration. I want to encourage as much of that as possible, because I think the media will have a lot to do with bringing us together that way.
That's really a powerful point. The news stories that show us what is happening, we can't be so dismissive in what's going on around the world, and how do we learn from that and learn from day to day on the ground in real communities what people experience. Tamsin.
Yeah, I was just thinking of Mesa's question, actually, and the comment about young people and how you on-ramp with these conversations. And I know when we started as the Impact Trust, a program called Roots to Resilience a decade ago, it was my son who at that time was a young teenager who said, "Mom, you can't make people so depressed on day one." But in Tlantla, you actually would maybe have some comment on this, because I know certainly in the work you've done in South Africa, I think one of the ways that you framed it, so I'm actually invoking, I'm sorry, on you on this one, but was really to look at what are young people's matters of concern, and how do they then engage with their ecosystem and environment, and how then are those matters of concern connected. And so I don't know if you have, in Tlantla, a better way of articulating that than me, but I thought you had some direct experience of what Mesa was asking.
Sure, I'll make an attempt. It's not an academic one. So I've always sort of taken the route of contextualizing content, where I think, just as Joffrey said, the stories around what people experience on a day-to-day basis, and then sort of connecting it with the realities of the content that one is bringing. And so when we start, obviously, in training, we sort of make young people think about what are the things that are of concern to them on a daily basis. What are those things that make them have sleepless nights, right? And what are those things that give them hope for the future? And then we start to talk, then sort of make that unravel towards sort of, the environment and where we're at and the polio crisis and the economy, because generally young people think the crisis is just about the environment and not so much the people, not so much communities, the economies, politics. So truly just bringing what they have as a concern and then sort of trying slowly, contextually to sort of bring to focus the polio crisis in an easy way. Um, and I think one of the things that I've sort of over the last year, especially, sort of been challenged with when it comes to the issue of awareness, consciousness, it's always according to who or to what matrix when I work in different spaces. So I'm trying to not bring a sort of predisposition of what I know, what I've heard, what I've been told, what the books are saying, what YouTube is saying, but to sort of try and meet people where they're at and whatever awareness they have to then help them frame, who is that awareness coming from or where is it coming from and who is influencing it? And is there space for them to sort of see other places that can influence their awareness to sort of create new awareness and consciousness? Because in Africa, well, in South Africa specifically, I'm finding that there's a lot of pushback, especially from young people, when it comes to sort of westernized content, information. There's sort of a thing where, we want to decolonize everything so much so that we even push back really good information. So my way is really contextualizing and helping them find new forms of influence for their awareness and consciousness, without, superimposing my own or that of others onto those that I train. I hope that, yeah.
I want to build on the central point I think that you're making too, is that you led with questions. You didn't lead with answers. You didn't lead with propositions or problems. You started with a question about what their concerns were, what they were interested in, what kept them awake at night. I think that's the starting point of kind of any change and talking with people and within their context. So I think that's very insightful, and there's a lot of wisdom in that we can use in other spaces as we try to talk with people who often don't agree with us or different generations or whatever the context is. Lead with a question, not with an answer or proposition or solutions, right?
Yeah, no,
Okay.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Also, I just wanted to make, sorry, Tom.
No.
I see Sarah saying facilitating a systems thinking approach. It's been interesting because that is part of the program, systems thinking. One of the other challenges that we found, especially with the groups that we're going for, is how do we simplify very complex ideas? So systems thinking is a simple idea. I think if you're at a certain intellectual level, I think. So we found that there's some challenge in understanding concepts. So we've then had the challenge of how do we simplify things like systems thinking, the polio crisis, so that we bring first the language and the explanation to meet, participants where they are. And I think that has been an exciting journey for us as well. I just wanted to make that point. Sorry, Tom.
No, excellent. Good point. Because, yeah. Okay, Sarah, were you applauding or did you raise your hand? I'm sorry, can't tell the difference. Okay, cool. So we do have a couple of minutes left, so let's give everybody a chance to kind of give some parting thoughts, and feel free to wave me off if you don't want to make one. But Joe, we haven't heard from you in a while, and Jan either. So, but wave off if you want to, but speak up if you do. And nope, okay, good enough. Stu, anything you want to add? Okay. Okay, good. So some of our other folks who have kind of been part of this conversation for a while, anything you want to end up with or conclude with? What are your, why don't you, if you're shy about speaking up, why don't you just put it in the chat box about if there was a word or a phrase that it's a big takeaway from you today from this conversation, what would it be? What was the thing that most inspired you or felt that resonated?
I just want to raise a point about Marcello's planetary stewardship pledge. I think it's a wonderful idea. I happen to support an idea called the Earth Systems Treaty, which I think they're incredibly similar in terms of what they're trying to achieve. The issue is gaining traction for an idea like that on a global, you've got to get it done on a global cross-cultural basis. And how do you gain traction for an idea like that when you're trying to reach people from different cultures and ethnicities?
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks, Joffrey. Anyone else? Marcello, yes. Parting shots.
Just saying thank you for the comment that you made, Jeffrey. Yeah, I think that there is the fact that there are 300 million graduates in economics, law, and business, and there are universities. There are 13,000 business schools, and God knows how many universities. I'm going to start now with ESADE, and let's see. Each of these universities has thousands of alumni, so there is perhaps a system to accelerate and get traction. And the other idea, of course, is all the employers will have to countersign the pledge. So it's not just the actual people. Well, it's not the professionals only, but it's the employer. So I'll keep you posted. But thanks very much for your comment.
Beautiful, beautiful. And Oren, I want to hear that in your words. I think you did a really good synthesis there. So,
hearing Marcello, I was like, I'm going off on a tangent here, but it's like the same kind of initiative for people that graduate from art schools and the humanities, because those are the ones that can actually help link these conversations around consciousness and complexity and the changes that happen in the world. And I'd love to help with that initiative. My question is like, what is the role of arts and creativity to create the kind of readiness to hold complex issues and system thinkings?
Great, Oren. Thank you for that.
Yeah, just one final point for me, at least. There is a young historian in the Netherlands called Rutger Bregman, who has created a movement called Moral Ambition. And he's addressing himself to these kind of people who would work in law, in economics, and instead of, getting a well-paid job at McKinsey, they do something for society. And that's the sort of way I'm going, And I think also working with him on mobilizing next generation of people in their 20s and 30s to do something more meaningful with their lives. And the thing is, we need to work at the system level, of course, with politics, with government, but also the individual level.
Yeah.
And if we don't get more individuals to commit and to change, to re-educate themselves for the future we want to build, it's not going to be possible just to do it top down. So this idea of the pledge is actually connected with a new notion of citizenship. What does it mean to be a citizen in this Anthropocene? So it goes in that direction of a new meaning of citizenship and also a new meaning of ownership and leadership. So, I mean, I'm trying in one way, but I see a much bigger picture there.
Beautiful. Yeah, very good. Very strong points. Yeah, we're at the 12:30. So, Tamsin, you want to make a shameless plug for our next conversation?
I already did that in the chat.
Yeah.
So just to say to everybody, you are now on the list. You can unsubscribe, but do join us. Our next conversations in January. And if anybody wants to put in a topic, have anything they feel needs to be discussed. I know, Tam, you had some great ideas in our last conversation, but please feel free, as Jerry said, to bring a friend, expand the network, put in issues that you think might be worth discussing. And Oren and Michael, Stan, Jerry, I don't know if you want to add anything else to that, yeah.
Okay, so we're going to do our goodbye that we do in some countries where you clap 3 times and give gratitude to the collective because everyone participated. And then you clap 3 times and you take that gratitude from the collective to yourself because you also contributed and made this what it was. So everybody ready? Turn off hold it. Come off of mute. We need to hear these. We hear the noise. Okay, everybody ready? Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so
Thank you.
much.
Wonderful.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Beautiful conversation.